Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 9, 10A, and 11A of Fire Emblem, the Binding Blade. So, a couple things. First of all, sorry if I sound a little off today. I am sick, kind of. I have a cold. It's getting better, but I might still sound a little stuffy, and that's because I am. But it's no big deal. I just hope it doesn't affect the quality of the recording too much. Second of all, I'm going to be honest with you folks. I am really cutting it close to my self-imposed deadline here. I try to get these out over the weekend, whether that's Saturday or Sunday. And I am currently recording this on Sunday morning. And I have stuff to do today, so I don't know if I'm going to have time to edit all this. So if you're listening to this on Sunday, that's great. But if you're not, that means that I was not able to get this out on time. So sorry about that. Possibly. I don't know. But regardless, the reason I bring this up is because I'm going to cut the small talk this time, and we're just going to get right into it, starting with our question from the previous episode, which was, who is your favorite miscellaneous, like, one-off chapter villain from Fire Emblem? And I got a couple different responses. Like Soup and I were talking about in the last episode, we got one person who said Mustafa, although they did clarify that they meant that Mustafa was their least favorite, which is fine. I didn't say favorite, I did say most memorable, and a lot of people dislike Mustafa because we can talk more about this when we get there, but Mustafa kind of like, he's very overhyped. If you go into any comments section of Don't Speak Her Name on YouTube, the OST, you'll see a lot of people like, Mustafa's like the most emotional character in the entire series. All this excellent writing put into one guy who shows up for 10 minutes. And I do actually think Mustafa is a pretty good one. I just think it's a little bit funny how much the community kind of overhypes him. And I also think it's very funny that he got into Heroes before, like, many, many characters across the series that I would have loved to see in Heroes sooner. Although I think we're getting pretty close to having all of the characters in the series in Heroes at this point. Yeah, that's probably not true. But I can't, other than from, like, Thracia, I really can't think of very many that aren't in at this point. So, anyway, doesn't matter. Mustafa's a good pick, whether it's for your favorite or for your least favorite, because I can see valid reasons for both. And then on Twitter, at Biozilla said, there are many who come to mind, but among the first has to be Paulus, the has-been colonel from Chapter 14 of Thracia 776. His expressions of guilt and primary responsibility for the death of his men stuck out to me. He is still a dirtbag for his allegiance to the Empire, though. And honestly, Biozilla, I gotta say, that's quite, you really summed it up quite nicely, very eloquently. And I agree that Paulus, his struggle and his story is very interesting. And I appreciate that. Now, my favorite is Reincock, because his name is Reincock. And I don't... No. Honestly, I've been thinking about this since we put out that episode. And 2 weeks later, I still really don't have a good answer. Reincock is probably up there. I think I know who it is. This answer might change. This might be a question I come back to at a later point, but off the top of my head right now, I have to say that it's probably that one Loptis priest in FE4 Chapter 7 who loses his Fenrir in that game? His long-range tome. And I just remember that episode of the podcast is honestly like one of my favorites in terms of like the content. I think I did a really good job articulating my thoughts on a lot of the elements of that chapter, and I remember really having a fun time with that one boss and talking about him. Unfortunately, it's also one of the worst in terms of like audio quality, because I was still figuring out like how my microphone worked, and there was like parts where the audio kind of like cut out. There was background noise. It was just a whole mess, and it's unfortunate that that's such a good chapter and one that I feel like I had a lot of good things to say about. Ended up having that happen to it. But c'est la vie, it is what it is. So, for next episode, what I want to know is... So normally I would ask, what is your favorite between A route and B route? But a couple things. First of all, I know basically everybody is going to say A route, so I don't think I'm going to go that direction. And then the other thing too is, if I did want to ask it, I might ask it next episode, because that's when we're doing B route. Okay, I think I got it. And it's a bummer to burn this question so early on into the podcast, because I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities later where it'll come up and be relevant. But I think this is a good one to ask. So today we're going to be playing Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 is honestly one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite, Fog of War chapter in the series. I think I don't like the fog. I think it would be just objectively better without the fog, but I do think that the map layout is pretty good. There's a lot of choke points. I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to talk about it in depth in a minute. But the reason that I bring this up is because what I want to know is, what is your favorite Fog of War map in the series? I know it can be kind of like a best of a bad lot kind of deal. That's fine. Because a lot of the Fog of War maps are just terrible. I want to know if there's any that you genuinely really like. Okay, so with that done, we can go ahead and move into our chapters for the episode, starting with Chapter 9, The Misty Isles. After everything that happened in Ostia, Bern has kind of settled down. They're being very quiet. It's a little unsettling, actually. They kind of point out that Bern is kind of just like completely gone radio silent for a while. In the aftermath of Hector's death, Eliwood is placed in charge of the Lycian League. He's kind of made the what's the word? There's a term for it that is escaping me, but basically the temporary leader of the Lycian League, for the time being until everything is settled down. And now that the place has had a chance to get organized in the aftermath of Hector's death, they've kind of put together a more formal army, and the one placed in charge of that army is Roy. And this time the game actually does a pretty good job of justifying this. I mean, he's still 14, 15, but I do think that unlike the situation with Hector, they were pretty valid for picking him here because he really showed off his mettle in the situation with Ostia. He handled the situation with Laos. He, successfully made it to Ostia and quelled the rebellion there and saved Lilina. He did all these things. I guess saving Lilina isn't, maybe not necessarily, but, probably for most people. And I think they really just recognized his talent as a leader through those exploits. And, I have no problems with this. Though the nitpickiest, why is the anime written like this, bullshit complaint is gone. I've revoked it because it makes way more sense now than it did in the previous couple of chapters. Now, if you recall, in the last chapter, or in the last episode at least, Roy called in a favor from Etruria saying, hey, can you guys please come help us out? And they did, and now basically Lycia owes them one. So Etruria is trying to cash that in here by saying, Lycia, you are going to go to the Western Iles, which is mostly colonized by Etruria, and I guess there's a bunch of bandits there, and the people, the Lycia army is going to help restore order to the Western Isles. Just as kind of like a hey, we scratched your back, now you scratched ours kind of thing. It only took 9 chapters, but we're finally fighting bandits in Fire Emblem. No, I guess we fought them in Chapter 1 and then in Chapter 5. But this has been a relatively bandit-less, Fire Emblem game so far. Relatively speaking at least. Now, the Western Isles is most prominently known for its mining operation. There are a lot of mines there that export precious minerals. And so that's kind of like what their main role is. And I do like that the game, and this is kind of necessary for the plot that happens here, so it's not like superfluous world building information or anything, but I do appreciate that the game makes a consistent effort to like kind of give each nation its own identity, as opposed to this just being like oh, it's some islands that Etruria owns. No, they have like a culture here and an export, and I just think that's interesting. Kind of like Ilia with the whole mercenary thing. The game name drop. I don't remember the context, but the game name drops a couple of people here from Etruria. There is Roritz, who is the High Chancellor, and Accardo, who is the noble who's been kind of placed in charge of the mining operation in the Western Isles. And these guys are going to be important going forward, and the game just kind of lets us know here that I think it's kind of like this is their kind of like decision to have Lycia do this, which I think is supposed to like raise a couple eyebrows. But I mean, honestly, nothing here so far has seemed particularly out of whack. Next, we cut to Roy's POV. This whole thing was the opening narration. We cut to Roy's POV, and Roy is here with Cecilia, who we met last chapter, and Cecilia kind of like gives the lowdown to Roy. They talk a little bit and explain, there's some bandits here, yada yada yada. But then they go into some dialogue and some exposition about Etruria as a whole, and it turns out that the prince of Etruria, whose name they say, but again I cannot remember for the life of me, Mirden, Prince Mirden. So they're talking about Prince Mirden, how he passed away, and so the king of Etruria, King Mordred, was so overcome with grief that he's kind of like stopped being the king, and Roritz has kind of taken advantage of that and is kind of trying to manipulate Etruria to his own ends, basically, and that's important context to know going forward, and it's important context as to what's going on here, because as we said, Chancellor Roritz is the reason that Etruria is here in the first place, and is, we think that might be, there's something suspicious about that, but, only time will tell. Then the chapter begins, and it is a Fog of War map. We love these. This is actually the first one in the game so far, if I'm not mistaken, and there's not too many of them, and the ones in this game, on average, aren't that bad. The only one I can think of that's just, like, genuinely really terrible is, like, one of the Ilia chapters has Fog of War. Oh, and then, I think there's 2 Fog of War maps in Sakai, and one of them's, like, fine, the first one, but then the other one is in the mansion. I don't like that one either, so, I think that one's Fog of War. Anyway, doesn't matter. This one's okay. There's some cool side objectives here. The goal is to get to the top left of the map and kill the boss there. But there's some cool side objectives. There's a couple different ways to go. There's some villages to get, some shops, all the good stuff. And the layout is honestly really cool. There's a bunch of choke points and bridges and things like that for you to take advantage of, and I do really like that a lot. So all in all, I actually think this is a pretty good map, and in any other episode might even be a contender to win for best map of the episode, although, this time around that's definitely not going to happen, but we'll talk about that later. So a couple of turns into the map, we see the boss talking to a couple of his minions. So one of them is Fur, who, if you remember, Fur is a character who we met in Chapter 7. She was with Noah in the arena, and he was kind of like helping her out. She is, for whatever reason, joined forces with the bandits and is actually being manipulated into thinking that Roy and his group are bandits themselves. And it turns out that the boss, whose name is Scott, he is trying to get her killed so that he can get her sword, the Wodao. I guess the Wodao is a really powerful sword. We can talk more about it when we actually recruit for her, because we can recruit for her. She is a recruitable character. And we recruit her by talking to her with Noah, because, they were together in Chapter 7, so he knows her. Then Fur runs off to talk to another guy by the name of Shin, and Shin is a Sakean. You can kind of tell, they have a very distinct fashion style, so you can kind of tell just by looking at him. And then, in case that wasn't obvious enough, they talk a little bit about his history, and he says that he is looking for the granddaughter of one of the chieftains of Sakai. So, this one's not super obvious, but I would say that they're doing a pretty good job of implying that in order to recruit Shin, you need to talk to him with Sue. And if you're like me, I'm using Noah, so that's no problem. But Sue has been on the bench since we got her in Chapter 6. Actually, I think I brought her for Chapter 7 for the Wyverns, but, I haven't been using her very much. So bringing her was a little bit tricky, keeping her safe, but at least she has very high mobility, so that's good. Now, the annoying part, probably the most annoying part of the chapter, is that these recruitable characters, it can be kind of hard to tell when when you need to have your characters nearby to recruit them, because there's fog, so you can't really tell when they're like right around the corner. So I've had plenty of times where Shin comes up and attacks my guys, and I don't have Sue close enough because I wasn't expecting him to show up, and then I can't have her too close because then other enemies might come out of the fog and attack her. It's just the whole thing. Thankfully, this game, right in a couple previous chapters, we got some good items to deal with this. We got a torch staff, first of all, and then as in previous games, thieves have very good vision in Fog of War, or I guess it would just be the previous game. So if you bring Chad or Astor or both, Astor is actually a very good pick to bring to this chapter because there are a ton of axe users, and obviously Astor is very fast, very evasive, and he has enough strength to use like steel swords effectively, and generally he can be a really good combat force to be reckoned with here. I guess if you trained Chad can also fill that role, but most people are probably going to use Astor. Any sword user here can really get a good couple of licks in, which is actually relevant because I guess I'm trying to think. You progress through the map. If you have a promoted Shanna here, that's really good. She can use swords. The fog makes it a little bit tough for her to avoid archers because you can't see them coming. But otherwise, she's really not. She can be really effective. She can rescue drop people. She can fly over the mountains. She's fantastic to have here with swords so that she doesn't get completely bodied by the axe users that are everywhere. So I would definitely say if you have any interest in using Shanna at all, you definitely should promote her before this map. Whether if you like getting your characters to level 20, that's fine. You might have to boss abuse a little bit to get there, but it's worth it. Trust me. Or like me, if I promoted her probably like level 12 or 13. So whatever works. Anyway, once you kind of get your foothold in the map, you'll end up recruiting Fur and Shin, and we'll talk about them both kind of at the same time, I guess, because there's not really a point. You do recruit them a few turns separate from each other usually, but doesn't really matter. So Fur is a Myrmidon, a la Rutger. Unlike Rutger, her bases are not good. She is fast, but she's frail, she's weak. She comes with a Wo Dao, which is not... I mean, it's strong. The Wo Dao is a weapon that is, I believe... is that a later thing? A later game thing? In some games, the Wo Dao, or its equivalent, the Shamshir, is only usable by Myrmidons and Swordmasters, and then some other, I think Lane can usually use them, and Erica. Yes, okay, so Myrmidons and Swordmasters only. So it's a good sword. You could just give it to Rucker, and he'd be better with it. He'd have 80 crit if he's promoted at this point, which he probably will be. So honestly, it's not really worth using Fur. I like Fur, and I actually really like using her because of all the chapters where she possibly could have joined, this one is custom made for her to get as many kills as possible. There are a lot of, obviously I've said axe users, but then also at a certain point in the map, a bunch of axe using reinforcements start showing up from the forts. Some of them have hand axes, some of them have iron axes, so it can be a little bit of a pain to kill them all, but there are a lot of them, and I think Fur got 5 levels just from killing these reinforcements. She didn't even kill all of them, so if you can manage to grind off of those reinforcements, then Fur can get pretty strong here and get pretty high level. She only ended up she honestly got strength a couple times for me, but I still think she's only about average because she got a couple early on and then she just missed the level up for 6 in a row. So yeah, I am using Fur this playthrough. I use her in most playthroughs. I think I mentioned last time. And this time's no exception. I do kind of like to branch out sometimes, but I think this time is I enjoy using the characters that I like, so I'm just gonna use the characters that I'm used to. So anyway, Fur is here, and she's on the team, and she's a lot of fun. I like her. Obviously we'll talk about her character. Actually, she is gonna be one of the last characters that we talk about, because she's gonna be in the same SSS episode as Corel, for obvious reasons. They're related to each other. Corel is the absolute last character to join, so we're not going to see him for a very long time. So unfortunately, Fur is going to kind of be in the dust for the SSS episodes, but we will get to her eventually. And then next is Shin. Shin is a nomad, the same as Sue, and he's pretty good. Honestly, he's probably the best bow user in the game. Especially on hard mode. He does get hard mode bonuses. I don't think Fur does, which is weird. Or maybe she does, and they're just... No, yeah, okay, no, she does. They're just still really bad, because her bases are terrible. But Shin actually has decent bases, and his hard mode bases are quite good. So he's one of the best bow users in the game, on hard mode for sure. And then even on normal mode, his only competition is, Klein. But I think you could argue the horse wins out in that one. Shin's pretty good. I've never used him personally. I don't really like using the nomads, because I don't really like using bow users in general. I do sometimes, and I have used, I think, Sue in the past, but I don't really plan on using him this playthrough. The other main reason that I don't really use them in general is because I don't like going to Sakai. And if I'm just playing casually and I don't, plan on going to both routes like I do for this podcast, then I just don't even bother touching the nomads. I train Shanna. Sometimes I'll train Tate. And then I'll go to Ilya, and that'll be that. So if you are going to use Shin, just beware, because using him too much you will end up going to Sakai, and nobody wants that. No, some people do prefer Sakai, and I think that's fair, but I don't. So I tend to steer clear of the nomads as much as possible. All right. Now, with most of the bandits cleared out, it's time to make our choice. If you are familiar with this game, you already know what I'm talking about, but if you aren't, there is a route split that occurs right after this chapter, 10 and 11A versus 10 and 11B. And the way that it's determined is by the house you visit in this chapter. There's a house in the bottom left, that doesn't matter. But there's two houses in the top right. One of them gives you a killer bow, and the other one gives you a restore staff. And both of those items are pretty good. Killer bow, I think, is probably better, obviously, especially if you're using a bow user. Like me, I'm using Dorothy this playthrough. But even if you're not, it can be good on Klein, it can be good on Shin. So I would go for the killer bow most instances. But if you want to go B route, you do have to pick that restore staff, which can be handy as well. There's some statuses that you might want to get rid of at some point down the line. Now, the justification for why you go to each route, depending on the house you visit, is actually pretty good, because each house will tell you about a different area of the islands. So if you go to the left turn, if you go to the left house, you will hear about the mines in the north, and how the people there, the workers there, are worked to the bone and never given a moment's rest. And it seems like a really hellish place to work. So I guess based on that, you decide to go to the northern mines, and then if you go to the right house, you will hear about the resistance in the west, and how there's they're kind of pushing back against you don't hear about this explicitly, but there's like a resistance effort going on in the west. That's really all you hear about, and you figure it's probably worth going to check that out. If you don't visit either house, unlikely, but if you don't visit either house, you will go to a route. That's the default route. So the ones we're going to talk about today, basically, that's the default. Oh boy, this cold is really catching up with me. The default route, and you go there if you don't visit either house. Now, the only thing that I think is kind of silly about this is that there's really no justification for why one house closes its doors to you after the other one, after the other one lets you in. There's no indication that they're going to do this. And in fact, the other times that they've done this across the series, like in FE1 and FE11, they usually say, oh, hey, thanks for visiting us. By the way, the village next to us fucking hates us, so you probably won't be able to go visit them anymore. And granted, that doesn't tell you beforehand, so it can still kind of be like a cheap, like, fuck you. But at least they explain what's going on there, as opposed to this, where it's, like, kind of weird. They just kind of, like, do it apropos of nothing. I don't know. It's just a bit odd. But either way, you go to the left house. I went to the left house this time. I made a save state. We're going to go back and visit the right house next time. But for now, we visit the left house. We learn about the mines in the north. And then we go and kill Scott, who is the boss. He's pretty tough. He's a berserker. He's not our first promoted boss. We've seen a couple now at this point. But he's probably, in a vacuum, he's the most dangerous. Obviously, Henning is crazy. But I would, the crit rate on Scott is nothing to scoff at. So, it might be worth killing him with Fur. She can do a pretty good job of that. But otherwise, you just get rid of him in some fashion or another. I'm rambling on at this point. You kill Scott, you capture, and then you move on to the next map. They talk a little bit about how, Merlinus is like, oh, what's our next move? And Roy's like, well, I heard that there's some shit going on in the mines up north, so let's go check that out. And then that's how we move in to Chapter 10, which is called The Western Resistance. The narration explains that there are 3 islands in 3 islands that compose the Western Isles. There's Fibernia, Caledonia, and Dia. And this isn't relevant to anything, but it's nice world building, so I included it anyway. And they kind of talk. The narration kind of talks about the islands, what they do, and all that stuff. The opening narration isn't really interesting this time around, from what I remember. So we're just gonna cut to the main events, the POV of the enemy. We find out that there is a woman by the name of Lalum being held in the dungeons of an upcoming castle. We don't know her name yet, but her name is Lalum. And she's being held captive by the boss of this area, whose name is Nord. Yeah, Nord. I remember because I made a joke about how this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. This episode is not actually sponsored by NordVPN. I just want to make that clear. Nord has Lalum captured and is holding her prisoner. Roy is just passing through the area on his way to the northern mines, which is weird because he's actually, if on the map, he's moving from north to south. So I don't know what that's about, but he's moving through the area, and this castle is under the control of Etruria. This is an Etrurian guy who he's passing by, and so they're here to work with Etruria. So he's expecting to just ask for safe passage, and to not have any problems. But unfortunately for Roy, what he doesn't know is that apparently Roritz, the Chancellor, has put out a hit on them. He's told the nobles here and the Etrurian people, hey, if you get the opportunity, kill the Lycian army. Just wipe them out. So Nord decides to take this opportunity to attack, and Roy has no choice but to defend himself. Now, the map layout this time around is quite simple. It's basically a straight shot down to the bottom, and you have to fight through a gauntlet of enemies to kind of get to the castle. It's kind of neat, honestly. It's simple, but I do think that compared to like maps like this are fine. Not every map needs to be like an intricate weaving layer of different roads and optional objectives. There are some optional objectives here, just not very many. And honestly, I'm cool with that. I think that they had an idea here, which is you're just pushing your way through, an enemy, a full head-on clash with the enemy to try to get to this castle, and that's a neat idea. And I feel like it's executed well here. This is a very I'm not gonna pretend like it's a good map. I would say it's a very serviceable filler map, but it's not bad. It's not bad by any means, which I think I can see why some people might not like it though, because it is very simple. Very straightforward. There's really not much to say about it. I do think this is our first instance of a generic promoted enemy. There's a berserker in the center down here, but he's pretty easy to deal with. You can have any evasive sword. You have to be careful because you can just get unlucky and die. That's the unfortunate thing, is that as astronomically unlikely as it is, it is entirely possible that he hits like Rucker with like 5% hit and then just crits him and kills him. Unbelievably unlikely once again, but it is possible, which is why I don't really like Berserkers very much, especially as generic enemies that can move as opposed to bosses that can't. But it is what it is. It's not too bad. A few turns into the map, we see a scene between a purple-haired guy and a woman villager, and the purple-haired guy, whose name is Gesse, he says, "I'm taking off." And he says that he wants to go get revenge for his comrades. I guess his crew, who he's been with for a while, was tricked into going to the mines by the people around here, by Nord and his his followers. He said, "Hey, if you go to the mines, we'll give you work." But basically, they were worked to death, and they ended up passing away. And so Gesse wants revenge, so he takes off. And you can talk to him with Roy and recruit him. He comes onto the field as a green unit. If you talk to him with Roy, you recruit him, and he joins you. And Gesse is a pirate. Pirate is a very interesting class, just conceptually, because you don't see a lot of those. We saw in FE1, I guess just FE1, I think he was cut from FE3. We have Daros, who is a pirate, and he's one of the first recruitable characters in the series, so I guess it's not that weird. But in most Fire Emblem games, pirate is an enemy-only class, so getting one is pretty cool, and it's nice to see. Gesse is a fun guy. He has an interesting character that we can talk about another time. But just in terms of gameplay, it's worth noting that he's not very good. Unfortunately, his bases are a little shaky. He does join with a high enough axe rank to use the Brave Axe, which I believe is B. So that's pretty cool. And he's certainly serviceable and usable. He promotes to Berserker, which is a really cool class. With that high crit rate, those fucking awesome animations. I've never really talked about the GBA animations, but honestly, maybe I'll save that for like a wrap up thing. But man, the GBA animations are so fucking good, and Berserker is one of the best. But unfortunately, he's not that great. His growth rates aren't terribly special. His bases aren't spectacular, so he's kind of just an alright character. He's not terrible, but he's not very good either. A little bit further into the map, we do get access to another recruitable character. This time, it's a red unit. Nord calls over a man named Gonzalez, and Gonzalez is clearly very, he doesn't seem like the brightest light on the tree. He seems kind of like a I don't know what the right word is, but this is a trope used in stories for a long time now. Kind of a slow, dim-witted guy. It's honestly a little bit offensive, but I don't really I'm not gonna die on that hill. I don't really care that much. Kind of the slow, dim-witted brute who kind of just like he's so stupid that he kind of just does whatever he's told because he's been convinced that whatever person he's working under has his best interest at heart, et cetera, et cetera. So now Nord is telling him to go kill the villagers and go ransack a village. And Gonzalez is like, oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. He kind of puts up a token fight, and Nord says, we'll do it anyway, and Gonzalez agrees. Now you recruit Gonzalez by talking to him with Lilina. We talked a little bit about this if you listened to the previous SSS episode, where Lilina talks to Gonzalez and kind of, says like, hey, don't do this. It's wrong. You can do the right thing. You can join us and fight back, and we'll make sure that you don't have to destroy any villages. And Gonzalez agrees and joins up with you. Now, Gonzalez is a brigand, and this one is, it's essentially the same thing as pirate, conceptually, but technically this is the first time we've seen a playable brigand, I guess, unless you count... Oh, no, that's not true! I forgot Marty! I was going to say, unless you count Dagdar, but no, Marty too. Oh, man, I can't believe I forgot Marty. What the fuck? What's wrong with me? I love Marty. Okay, never mind. Gonzalez is still a pretty cool guy, though, and he's fun. He's fast and he's strong and he has a good weapon rank, and we're gonna talk because we do actually recruit Gesse and Gonzalez on both routes, and the level that Gonzalez joins at is different depending on the route you play, and his stats are exactly the same across both. But in on A route, he's at level 3, and then in B route he's at level, I think, like 9 or 10, really close to promotion. And it's kind of like up to your own personal preferences, which you prefer. On A route, you have a little bit of, he has more room to grow, but realistically, he's not going to get that many extra levels anyway. So it's probably better, he's probably better on B route, where you can just promote him basically instantly, and then get that sweet +5 skill. Because the most notorious thing about Gonzalez, I'm kind of bouncing all over the place here. I think the cold is kind of like screwing with my head a little bit, making my ADHD act up. But the most notorious thing about Gonzalez is that he has 15% skill growth and a very low base skill. His hit rates are going to be terrible, especially with how low hit on axes are already. He's got some really, really bad hit rates. Now, there are ways to patch this up. I like supporting him with Lilina. I do plan on using Gonzalez this playthrough. So I do like supporting him with Lilina. She gives him a little bit of extra hit. Normally, I just sell all my secret books in any Fire Emblem game. Secret books are terrible. They're not really worth, passing up potentially, 4,000 gold. That's a lot of money. But usually, if I'm using Gonzalez in FE6, I just use my secret books on him. I know I'm passing up money for the boots, but I think it's fine. I like using Gonzalez. I will probably just give him my secret. I haven't yet given him any secret books, but I probably will. And then, of course, when he promotes, he gets a +5 skill boost, which is really big. And I think every point of skill gives you +2 hit, so that's +10 hit right there as soon as he promotes, which is really good and is probably the main argument for promoting him so early, so that he can get those mad skill gains. He also promotes to Berserker, and both Gonzalez and Gesse promote with a hero crest. So unfortunately, this is kind of what Soup and I were talking about last time. The promotion item economy is really in shambles in this. And I think, for Soup, it works out well, and I think he enjoys it. Personally, I don't, because right now we have, and the Night Crest has the same problems. We have Rucker, Deke, Fur, Gonzalez, and Gesse. Oh, and also Wade and Lot. So that's 7 Hero Crest users, and we only get 2 Hero Crests. We get one in Chapter 7, and then I think we get another one as a village reward in the next chapter. So, you can't really use too many of these guys. I'm planning on using Fur and Gonzalez, and then if you want to use any of those other guys, or if you've already promoted Rucker because he's really good to early promote, then you really only get your choice of one, and that's fine. Like, if you're playing this game for like the 3rd or 4th time, then you can plan out all of the promotion items and like who to use and all that stuff. That's not a big deal. But it is, I feel, just like needlessly limiting, and you do get a lot of characters in this game, so I do think that it would have been better if they had like given you maybe like a master seal every now and again. Maybe make it like really hard to get. Maybe. So in the next chapter, getting ahead of ourselves, we get a reward for if all of the green NPCs survive. There's 2 groups of green NPCs. If all of one group survive, you get 1 reward. If all of the second group survives, you get another reward. Maybe if all of them survive, all of them total, maybe you get a master seal, or something to that effect. And I think that could have been done. You could scatter them infrequently throughout the game to make things just a little bit easier, because, man, I don't know. It's just really hard to promote anyone in this game. If you want to use like multiple characters, you really have to be careful about, how much use you're getting out of these promotion items. But anyway, that's I'm probably not going to bring it up again. I did mention that Night Crest users have the same problem. I mentioned this briefly last time, but there's Lance, Alan, Boris, Wendy, Barth, Noah, and Trek. That's 7 Night Crest users also, and we only get 1 for. Honestly, I still think we only have 1. I haven't used it yet because I haven't promoted Noah yet. So, but still, that's crazy. Anyway, Once you get Gonzalez, the rest of the map is pretty straightforward. You kill some enemies. There are some reinforcements that come from the forts down south and from a fort out to sea on the west. So you can kill some guys, get some experience, and then you kill NordVPN and you capture the castle and you rescue Lalum. Lalum is a very outgoing, energetic young girl who is very excited to be rescued. She gives Roy a big hug, and there's it's a cute comedy scene. And Lalum basically spills the beans on everything. So Lalum is a member of the resistance force, and she tells Roy, they kind of hash it out a little bit. Roy's like, we're here from Etruria to stop the bandits, and Lalum's like, bruh, Etruria is working with the bandits. Like, Etruria is behind everything. They're organizing these bandits. They're paying them to oppress the villagers. They're the ones that are forcing the workers to work nonstop in the mines. Like, Etruria is the bad guy here. And Roy's like, God damn. And I to his credit, Roy believes it immediately. He's like, I trust Cecilia, but I'm willing to believe you. I'm going to ask Cecilia about this, but like, I'm going to move forward under the impression that Etruria is the one that's or I get he's like waiting to learn more, but he doesn't really like seem super skeptical of it. So I think that's pretty cool. And yeah, so with that in mind, they decide to move forward to link up with more of the resistance and put a stop to whatever Etruria's got going on here. So that's how the chapter ends. Moving into the next one, we have chapter 11A, which is called The Hero of the West. So the opening narration explains that Roy is writing a letter to Cecilia to kind of explain the situation. It just kind of shows that he has some faith in her and knows that even if all of Etruria is kind of like conspiring here, she at least can help. And he tells her that he plans to, like, what he plans to do next, basically. They're going to this village to meet up with the resistance. We cut to an enemy POV where we find Bishop Orlo. He is kind of talking with, he's talking with Milady, who we've met before, and basically Milady is asking, have you seen Princess Guinevere? She's basically going around the entire continent just looking for Princess Guinevere, and Orlo says, nope, don't know where she is, sorry, and he says, and she says, okay, bye, and leaves. It's kind of established that Byrne and Etruria have a bit of a working relationship here, which is, it's a twist, right? Supposedly they're on opposite sides, so it's a little bit odd that Bishop Orlo is, on talking terms with someone from Etruria. But it doesn't really matter anyway, because Bishop Orlo was lying to her. He does know exactly where Guinevere is, and they are planning on using her as a bargaining chip. Apparently Chancellor Roritz knows where she is and is planning to use that information in some way. It's also revealed here, in case it wasn't obvious enough already, Roritz was the one who orchestrated the death of Prince Mirdan, an assassination apparently. And he says that, he gets a report that they're ready to attack the leader of the resistance, who's apparently hiding out in one of the nearby houses. We then cut to Roy, who, is just kind of chatting, talking about how much of a piece of shit Orlo seems like. And then the soldiers show up in the town, and Roy decides that it's time to attack. Now, I made a note here because I actually was very, very blatantly misremembering how Merlinus was in this game, at least up to this point, because I really thought, like, this is the point where I remember him, like, really starting to get on my nerves, because for some reason, I really distinctly remember him being against fighting Etruria, which would, for obvious reasons, and it would make sense logically, but it would be another one of those instances where his pragmatism is kind of put up against Roy's idealism, and of course Roy, wanting to do the morally right thing, is not going to listen to Merlinus and fight anyway. But Merlinus doesn't put up any kind of fight here. He just kind of goes along with it, and in fact, defers to Roy, like, hey, Roy, should we attack to save the villages? And yeah, I just think it's cool. I'm sorry, Merlinus, for not giving you enough credit. I hope that doesn't change. I think we're about to see Elfin, and Elfin kind of like replaces Merlinus going forward, from what I remember. So honestly, I guess Merlinus just wasn't as bad as I remember him being. But anyway, I just wanted to make a quick note of that. We then start the chapter, and a few things to note right off of the bat. First of all, this is like every other map up to this point, it's been a siege, and we need to try to get Roy to the throne. But it is far from a straight shot. In order to get there, you either need to get rid of a wall that is 100 health and take the short way, if you could even call it the short way. If the the wall has 100 health, I don't know if I would call that a shortcut. Or you can go through the town. And that's kind of where the main draw of this map comes in, is that it is littered with side objectives. There are a ton of houses to visit. And there's shops to visit. There is an arena. There are optional characters to recruit, and some side objectives for keeping green NPCs alive. It's honestly such a detailed, fleshed out chapter that has so much going on, and I'll come out right out and say it. I think this is going to be the best map in the game. Like, this is obviously a very strong contender, at least, and I think most people would agree that this is one of, if not the single best map in the game. It's just so dense with stuff to do, and it's not easy either. It's hard and challenging, but in a completely fair way, or at least a mostly fair way. There are still same turn reinforcements, which is always a bummer to me, and I've talked about why in a previous episode. But honestly, the reinforcements aren't that threatening, and once you kind of get your a handle on the map, really the only way that they're gonna kill you is if you leave an injured unit in range of their spawn point, which isn't likely, and you're probably going to be fine. It's just a little bit annoying. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So what makes this map so interesting? How does it progress from one stage to the next? Okay, so there are a lot of mid-chapter events here. So let's kind of start off at the beginning. There are a bunch of enemies scattered all around the map. Most of them aren't very threatening. You were at the point in the game, especially on normal mode, where we're really starting to outpace the enemies, and overall, it's they're not really able to keep up with us anymore. Most of our good units can one round a lot of the enemies. Some of the brigands are like too bulky to one round, but we still double them pretty reliably, and it's generally not too hard to kill enemies anymore. So we can move pretty quickly through these guys, which is good, because we actually need to move very quickly in this map in order to save all of the villages. So you start off, and you'll notice that you have a new unit among your ranks. She is force deployed, so you don't need to waste not waste, but you don't need to spend a deployment slot on her in this chapter, because she will join you automatically, which gives you plenty of time to really get a handle on how she works. And that character is Lalum, our dancer. Now, Lalum is exclusive to the A route. We do get a character in B route named Elfin, who fills much the same role. He is technically a bard, but they're basically the same unit. They have the same stat spread. They're both 5 movement, and their main draw, if you've played any of the other games, you probably know that dancers are able to refresh one of your units, allowing them to act again in the same turn. Now, this is a very, very underrated ability by a lot of the less experienced Fire Emblem community. But I think if you have enough experience to be listening to this podcast, you're probably already familiar with how dancers can be, and how strong they are. Especially, I've talked about dancers in previous episodes of the podcast, so you get the idea. They're very, very good. Being able to have characters be able to do multiple things on the same turn can be really, really useful. In a most basic sense, it's essentially your best unit can now kill 2 guys instead of 1. But it also has a lot more nuance than that. You can give more experience to if you want a character to get a bunch of experience, you can now kill 2 enemies with them instead of just 1. If you need to break a wall, now you can get rid of that wall a little bit faster. If you want to visit 2 houses, you can visit 2 houses. If you end up missing a powerful an attack, and the enemy counters and hits you, and they're going to kill you next turn, you can use your dancer to dance that character and get him away. Things like that, and it's just so versatile. And I think people who don't use dancers, or who if you don't want to use dancers, obviously that's your own personal preference. But I think if for people who think that dancers are bad, or for that think that they're only as good as their best combat unit, are really undervaluing the versatility of having a character move twice on the same turn can really do. So with Lalam's help, we're able to get through this section of the map a lot faster than we would be otherwise. We can have characters like Zealot and Marcus rush forward and kill some guys and clear a path to the center of the map, which is where a lot of the happenings will be. They'll be going on. So after the first few turns, a few things start happening. First of all, some enemies show up from the bottom, but they're not just generic reinforcements. They are Etrurian, mercenaries that are, or I guess one group is mercenaries and the other is like the actual Etrurian military. Either way, we have two new characters here. One of them is named Klein, and the other is named Tate. And they kind of spend some time talking about their siblings. Tate says that she has a little sister who's also a Pegasus Knight like her. Klein mentions that he also has a little sister, and they kind of bond over that a little bit. And then Tate says, "I'm gonna go fly around and attack them from the north." And Klein says, "Okay." And then they leave, and one of the guys with him says, like, "Hey, didn't Roritz say that the Pegasi were expendable? Shouldn't we kind of like let them charge in head first?" And Klein's like, "No, absolutely not. They're still our valuable allies." And that's supposed to be your hint that he is like a noble guy who isn't who isn't just some sleazeball mini boss who's gonna kill some Pegasus Knights for fun. It's also supposed to be your hint that you can recruit him. Now, both of these characters, as they mentioned, have younger sisters. Klein's is Clarine. You wouldn't actually know this explicitly unless you read the Clarine supports with Deke. Maybe there's more that she mentions Klein in, but I don't know. She also... Oh, does she mention it in the story too? She mentions her brother in the story. I know that. So maybe you do know that she has a brother, actually. Either way, it's pretty easy to put together. I mean, they both look pretty similar. They're both blonde, which, of course, in anime land... Or I guess just like in a lot of stories, honestly, usually two characters having the same hair means that they're related, especially if they talk explicitly about having a younger sibling or whatever. So you can recruit him with Clarine. In playthroughs where I use Clarine, I try to recruit him with her because she can move a lot faster and is generally a little bit better at getting to him quickly. Now, of course, Clarine being a healer means that she's not going to be able to like deal with the enemies, and of course doesn't want to be put in range of too many enemies on enemy phase. But if you're protecting her with Marcus and Zealot, that's not really a problem. And then the other thing too is that it is more than possible to get Roy to Klein, like where he spawns, with enough time. I mean, you might be a little bit behind. You might have to rescue drop Roy a couple times or whatever. But it's really not too difficult. You can get him by without too much of an issue. And Roy can also recruit Klein, so that's not really a concern. Now, a couple turns... Actually, no. Okay, so let me take it one thing at a time. After Klein shows up, Tate is off the map for a while. She's going to be coming back later, but for now, it's just Klein. You recruit him, and all of his units turn green. And if you protect all of them, they're immediately going to start trying to run away, and they can be killed by the enemies, but... If you manage to protect all of them and let them all escape, then at the end of the chapter, you will get an Orion's Bolt, which is handy because we didn't get... It's the only promotion item that we did not get in chapter 7, 8, that range. Now, of course, an Orion's Bolt is only useful if you're actually planning on using a bow unit, which there, as I've established, there aren't many good ones. There's like Shin, and even then you might not want to use him because of Sakai. So, for most people, it's going to be 4,000 free gold. But hey, that's honestly not that bad. And of course, if you do, want to use one of the weaker archers, like in this case, I'm using Dorothy. It's handy to have for sure. Also around this time, in fact, I think at the exact same time, we see that Orlo is recruiting the bandits to attack the villages for him. And that you have another couple turns before they show up, but this is why you really need to book it, because the bandits show up in some caves over on the east side of the map, and it's only 2 turns. It's like the turn they show up, they can move. And so it's only one turn after that, maybe 2 turns, that they can before they can reach a village. So you really need to get there quickly with some of your stronger units like Marcus and Zealot to take care of them and make sure that they aren't able to get rid of the villages. Because in addition to obviously, the village rewards are pretty good for the most part, especially some of the ones that they're going to go after early. You also get I think it's what is it, an angelic robe or something like that, for keeping all of the villages safe for the entire map, which is tricky, but certainly not impossible. And that's kind of what I like about this map. It's like it's a fair, honest challenge, and especially on hard mode. You're gonna really be struggling to keep these villages safe, and it can be frustrating when one of them ends up getting destroyed and you have to reset, or if one of your characters dies because you overextended because you're trying to go fast. Like, that stuff can happen, but it never really feels cheap. I did get hit by a lot of low percent hits in this map, which obvious confirmation bias. 30% chance to get hit is not 0% chance to get hit, even in true hit system. I forgot to talk about true hit. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, my point is, it can feel frustrating sometimes, but I really don't think that this is an unfair challenge at all. I think it is a genuinely refreshing change of pace to actually be pushed to complete a map fast. And God knows we haven't had to do that since when? Like, when was the last time we were actually pushed to beat a map relatively quickly? It's certainly not in this game. Maybe, I guess, chapter 19 of Thracia? Maybe? I don't know. Something around there. Maybe Endgame, I guess, could also be considered. I don't know. It's been a while for sure, and it's very few maps in the series that really push you in the same way that this one does. So I think it's a genuinely fantastic map from start to finish. Now, we are not quite done yet. I'll be sure to talk about true hit at the end, or else I'm going to forget again. But we do need to talk about Tate. A few turns after Klein shows up, Tate is going to show up. Now, you might think, oh, hey, I know that her sister is Shanna. Either because you played the game before, or it's pretty obvious to put 2 and 2 together on this one. You're probably going to figure out that Tate is Shanna's older sister. So you might think, oh, hey, I can talk to Shanna with Tate, or the other way around, and recruit her, right? Well, if you tried doing that, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because she actually does not listen to Shanna at all. You need to recruit her by talking to her with Klein, which is pretty frustrating because she spawns at the far end of the map. Klein is way far, at the literal opposite corner of the map to talk to Tate. So you're gonna need to rescue drop him a little bit, or maybe have him run quickly. Make sure you bait the Pegasi. If too many of your units are on the right, then the Pegasi are going to be baited to go right. And if you're like me, you sent Klein all the way back to the beginning, and then they started going right, and you had to send them all the way back. It's pretty frustrating. I don't actually remember what talking to her with Shanna does, if anything. They definitely have a conversation, but I don't remember. I think she stays red, and I think all of her enemies, or all of her, units with her will still just attack you anyway. For the longest time, I thought she turned green, but let me just double check real quick. Okay, so I just looked into it, and it actually seems like there's a lot more axes of this than I originally remembered. So based on some video that I looked at, and some of the and basically what the wiki is telling me, there are a couple of different outcomes for this. So, first of all, like I mentioned, if you talk to her with Klein, she just turns blue right away. She joins up with you immediately. Now, if you haven't yet recruited Klein, you can talk to her with Shanna, and talking to her will do nothing. She will stay red. They do have a conversation together, but it doesn't do anything. Then, if you recruit Klein, you can talk to her again with Shanna, and then it seems like she turns blue, I think. Or, alternatively, there's a third option, which is that you can, if you have already recruited Klein before Shanna talks to Tate the first time, then you go to talk to her, she will turn into a green unit, and then if Klein talks to her, she'll turn blue. So you have 3 different options here for recruiting her, and it is a little weird. She might. It also could be that when you, if you talk to Shanna before recruiting Klein and then after recruiting Klein, she might just turn green as well. I'm not sure, but and it's also worth mentioning that if Klein is dead, you can't even talk to her at all. Not even like the same like, she stays red conversation with Shanna. You cannot talk to her at all. So that's a lot of different ways to recruit Tate. And I also didn't talk about Klein, so I guess we'll talk about both of them. But first, I just want to mention that Tate gets a bit of a bad rap for this. I always used to hate Tate because I always thought it was shitty that she is willing to fight and kill her own sister. But, as soon as Klein says, oh, no, don't worry about it, she's like, okay. And I think it's because there's definitely a hint of a romance between the two, or at least Tate has feelings for Klein, maybe not necessarily the other way around. So I always kind of just Tate has a crush on Klein and is willing to put that over her, her own sister. But thinking back on it and kind of reading the dialogue more, I do think it's, you can cut Tate some slack because it's been established numerous times that Ilian mercenaries are very, very loyal to their employers. So, Tate signed up for this and Shanna signed up for this. They both knew what it came down to. And if Tate ended up on the opposite side as Shanna, oh well, you got to do what you got to do, and that's kind of just what being an employee, and that's what being an Ilian mercenary means. And you can see that the opposite thing in reverse for Zealot and co. Realistically, shouldn't Legance be able to be like, hey, your Ostian mercenaries, come work for us? But no, they're loyal to Hector, and Hector put his trust in Roy. So, that's kind of how that goes. That's the chain of command there, you know what I mean? Anyway, I do think it's a little bit silly, but I don't think it makes Tate into a horrible character or anything. I don't really like Tate as a character from what I remember, but that's not the reason why. Okay, so now we have both Klein and Tate. Let's talk about them in gameplay. So Klein is a pre-promoted sniper, which is nice. He has good stats, especially on hard mode. He gets hard mode bonuses, and he's pretty good for a sniper. Player phase focus game, as I mentioned a couple times, so having an actually good bow unit is pretty nice. Shin obviously is better, but Klein does not come with the baggage of potentially risking you going to Sakai. So if I have to pick a bow unit to use, which I don't, I usually just don't use any of them, but usually my first go-to bow unit in any given playthrough will be Klein. He's really solid. I think his growth rates are okay. Let me just double check. But he's fun. He's cool. I like his character. He's just a nice guy. Yeah, his growths are fine. They're not fantastic or anything, but they're certainly not mediocre. So yeah, I like Klein. He's all right. Being a sniper is not necessarily the best for him, but he gets by just fine. Do his stats change between A and B route? I'm actually not sure. So yeah, he gets pretty decent hard mode. The hard mode bonuses are not set in stone. They are random, by the way, for what it's worth. But they're always going to be higher than his normal mode bases. It seems like the variance is a little smaller on B route. So the minimums are still the same, but the maximums can be a little bit higher on A route. It is the impression that I get. And then Tate comes around, and Tate is bad. So she is a Pegasus Knight, and that automatically makes her serviceable. Being able to rescue drop is really nice. All the advantages that Flyer Utility has, are really nice. And of course, if you lost your Shanna at some point, she can be a decent replacement. She can get 2 levels and promote immediately and just be a good sword bot for the rest of the Western Isles. But she's just so bad at base. Her bases are terrible, especially on normal mode. And on hard mode, they are significantly better, but not really enough to make a huge difference. She doesn't even come with, she has D rank lances. She can't even use an Axe Reaver, which is kind of what she would need to be useful in the Western Isles, considering how many Axe users there are. But she doesn't get that, so she can't really do that much. If you really set up kills for her, then she can maybe get by long enough to get 2 levels and promote. But then at that point, you just kind of have a worse Shanna. So, obviously your mileage may vary. You might have a very good Tate, or if you just like using Pegasus Knights. I love Pegasus Knights. They're like my favorite class in the series, or like up there at least. So I really, really like using them, and I've used Tate in playthroughs in the past, but usually I kind of steer away from her because her bases are just not doing it for me. I don't know. It's hard to make her work sometimes. But of course, if you have a free deployment slot, you can use her, and she can rescue drop people. Oh, and obviously, if Shanna dies, then using Tate still gives you an opportunity to go to Ilia, or it makes it easier for you to go to Ilia at least. So that's pretty good. Okay, now, if you're like me, when you got to this point in the map, you were like, oh, the map's kind of winding down, but you do still get reinforcements, and there's quite a few of them, too. Oh, I forgot to mention, Tate's Pegasus Knights turn green when you recruit her, and they actually don't try to escape immediately, or they don't make a beeline for it, at least. They actually stay and try to fight against Orlo and some of the other enemies, and it's very easy for them to die as a result. But if you can manage to keep them all alive, you get an Elysian Whip, which can be good if you're going to use Tate, or of course, later on we get Melody, who's quite good, especially on hard mode. So, whatever you like. I unfortunately did not manage to get my hands on the Elysian Whip, but that's fine. I don't think I'm going to use Melody this playthrough. Actually, no, I was planning on using Melody this playthrough. So I will need it at some point, but it's fine. I can always buy another one or something at some point. I'm not sure. I'll figure it out. Either way, though, even if you're not planning on using another flyer, it's still gold. So that's pretty nice. Now, just as you think things are starting to wind down, as I mentioned, we do get some more reinforcements. Bandits will keep spawning from the caves to the east, but you can cover those up. What's a little bit harder to cover up is the entire group of enemies that spawns near one of the houses on the east side of the map, basically saying, come out with your hands up, we have you surrounded. And out emerges someone by the name of Echidna. Echidna is the titular hero of the West. She is the leader of the resistance forces on the Western Isles, and she basically says, catch me if you can, and she starts fighting these guys. She is a green unit, and you recruit her by talking to her with Lalum. I don't think you can recruit her with Roy, but I might be wrong about that. But I know for a fact that Lalum can make her blue. And once you recruit her, you get your hands on one of the last female heroes in the entire series. I mentioned in previous episodes that you got for female heroes in the series, you get Radney in FE4, and she's only a substitute. You get Matcha from FE5, and then you get Echidna, who is this character we're about to talk about. And then after that, you don't get any female heroes in the entire series until the 3DS games, where you can choose, there are female mercenaries, and then you can choose to make them into heroes if you want to. But other than that, she's the only one we're going to see for a very, very long time. And honestly, what a note to end on, because she is pretty kick-ass. I mean, first of all, she just looks fucking awesome. But her stats are also quite good. She has really good bases, really good weapon ranks, B rank axes, which lets her use the Brave Axe that Gesse joined with just last chapter. And she's just generally fantastic. Her growths are bad, so don't expect her to hold out too well in the long term. But if you can get use out of her at base, she's going to be fantastic for the next few chapters where you get her. Unfortunately, she does not get hard mode. I mean, why would she? She doesn't join as an enemy. But she doesn't benefit from any of the same things that Tate and Klein do. But obviously, her class is much, much, much better. Being able to use swords for the accuracy, and then if she can afford to take the hit in accuracy, she can use hand axes. Or if she needs a little bit of extra attack power, she can use like the Brave Axe. Like these things are really, really nice for her to have. Is going to be one of our better units for quite some time. I don't plan on using her in the long term. Wait, actually, did I? No, I don't plan on using her in the long term. But she's pretty good, and I definitely plan on keeping her on the team as a filler unit until we get more characters that I want to use. Once you clear out all the enemies attacking Echidna, it's really just a matter of getting to Orlo and killing him. He's actually pretty tough to kill. He has 1-2 range because he's a bishop. He talks a little bit, like, I didn't go into detail about this, but at some point someone was like, Bishop Orlo, if you do this, like, you're going to become like public enemy number one. Please don't do this. And he's like, if they question me, then they're questioning God. So no one will dare speak up to me, which, I mean, it's certainly on the nose. I'm not even going to pretend that it's anywhere close to subtle, but I do think it's a nice representation of how people in authority abuse their powers, and, I mean, frankly, how people in positions of religious power abuse their authority. All memes about the Catholic Church aside, it was and still is a very common issue. So I definitely think that this is something that is relevant to our current world. Oh, and I should mention that Echidna, just on the subject of Echidna again, Echidna is exclusive to the A route. She's much better, I would say, than her B route equivalent, but also, it doesn't really matter. You probably, I guess some people might pick the route that they go on based on the characters that they get, but usually I don't. If I just feel like playing B route, then I'll play B route, and if I feel like playing A route, then I'll play A route. It really doesn't make a difference. Where was I? Yes, okay, so Orlo is tough to kill. He's a bishop. He has 1-2 range. I think he has a divine tome, and that's really powerful, and it can be difficult to hit him because his speed is decent. He doesn't get doubled by most of your enemies. I think I actually ended up killing him with Echidna because Echidna can deal with him pretty well at base. I haven't looked at my script in a while, so let me just make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, yes. So there is one. I did skip a couple things, but most of them aren't that important. One of them was that Klein. When Klein shows up, he seems a bit skeptical of what's going on, and I do appreciate that. Like, it shows that he's a little bit sharper than some of the other Etrurian people that he's fighting with. I don't remember exactly what he says, but he makes some kind of like deduction of like, it doesn't. Oh yeah, that's what it was. Like, I guess they heard from Roritz that Roy and the Lycian army are fighting alongside the bandits, and Klein's like, they just got here. How did they already make a connection with the bandits? So he's clearly thinking about these things, and I think it primes him for Roy showing up and saying, hey, Etruria is going against us and helping the bandits. We need you to help us stop them. And Klein agrees. So that's a little bit of characterization for Klein there. But the more important thing, I guess more important is relative, but a couple of turns into the map, after Milady fails to find Guinevere, she goes to talk to another wyvern rider by the name of Gale. Gale was originally supposed to be one of the 3 wyvern generals, but Narshin took his place because Narshin revealed that Gale is not native to Bern. He was not born in Bern, and therefore I guess that means he can't be a wyvern general. Now, Gale does not seem to have any hard feelings about this, and Minerva just comments on how admirable that is because he's still, willing to do what it takes. He says he's willing to ask Narshin for help, and Milady is like, that's a little bit weird, and he's like, why? He's my commanding officer, and he doesn't seem to hold a grudge against Narshin for, kind of the underhanded tactics in getting into his position of power. So I just wanted to make sure I commented on those 2 things because I do think that they're important to bring up both for Klein's character and to establish, Gale as a recurring character. He's going to show up a couple more times throughout the game, and he's going to be important to like Milady's character arc. So worth mentioning him here. So yes, that's pretty much it for this map. Once you kill Orlo, you can capture the throne, and we go into the ending cutscene. Now, Roy at this point meets someone by the name of Elfin. Elfin got mentioned earlier in Lalum and Echidna's conversation, and I was going to bring that up, but then I finished the rest of the map and saw that he just shows up here anyway, so I didn't want to bother. I did mention that Elfin is Lalum's equivalent in B route, and even though he doesn't join you as a unit on this route, he is still a presence in the story, and he basically tells Roy, hey, I'm a member of the Resistance, and gives Roy some information that he's kind of like, now that you know Etruria is evil, Etruria might attack Lycia, and in that case, shouldn't you be on the mainland to protect Lycia? And Merlina says, "That's a great idea, Roy. Let's get the hell out of here and get back to Lycia as soon as possible." But Roy says no because he has faith in his dad and in the other people on the mainland to protect Lycia, whereas the people of the Western Isles only have Roy and the resistance to depend on. And so he's going to stay here and do what he can here before going back. And Elfin kind of reveals that that was a little bit of a test. He says, like, I didn't lie to you per se, but I presented the information in a particularly inflammatory way. And I just wanted to see how you would react. And apparently he passed the test. And Roy isn't too happy about it, but goes along with it anyway. And so he and Elfin agree to march onward to the capital of the Western Isles to fight Etruria and basically free the people there from their tyranny once and for all. And that's the end of the chapter. So overall, really great one. Sorry that I was a little bit scattershot. I am already pushing the deadline here, and I don't want to have to re-record any of this stuff, but I did miss a couple things that I think were important. So hopefully that wasn't too difficult to follow. Maybe go back and re-listen to it if you're having a little bit of trouble like understanding what the fuck just happened. But I think I did an all right job. And in terms of gameplay, obviously, like I said, this is one of the best maps in the game, if not the absolute best, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, because I mentioned that Chapter 9 was quite good, and in a lot of other episodes, honestly, it would have taken, like if I had done 8, 8X, and 9, for instance, Chapter 9 would have been the winner, which is funny because I just hate Fog of War maps, and I think it would have been novel to see a Fog of War map win for best map of that episode. But unfortunately, it got lumped in with Chapter 11A, so any hope that Chapter 9 had of winning this episode is just out the window. And of course, Chapter 11A is going to be our winner for this time. And comparing it to Chapter 7, which is our previous reigning champ, I would say that Chapter 11A is definitely the better one here. I do like Chapter 7, but Chapter 11A is just like such a cool bombastic rush from beginning to end, and it's just a blast the entire way through. There's so many side objectives, so many cool things to do, and characters to recruit, a lot of stuff going on. It's a lot of fun. And I'm a pretty big fan of the next chapter we're going to be playing, which is kind of the equivalent to this one, Chapter 10B. In B route, the first chapter, Chapter 10, is where most of the villages are, and it's where we get a lot of the same, items from villages and things like that. It's where Klein and Tate show up in B route. But anyway, Chapter 11A, winner for the map gauntlet. Moving on to news. Obviously, elephant in the room. This is the first episode since the release of Fire Emblem Engage, and I hope everyone's been playing it and having a good time with it. I know that I've certainly been playing it. I tweeted out my thoughts about it, at the time I'm recording this, I want to say like 4 or 5 days ago, something like that, earlier in the week. And I definitely had a time with it. I don't think it's a bad game, and especially after I finished it, I've kind of been like thinking more about it and letting it sit with me, and I do honestly think it's a pretty fun game. I've gone on record multiple times saying that even my most Fire Emblem games I find fun. Even games close to the bottom of my list like Thracia, Revelation, Birthright. I find all these games to be fun in to a certain extent. The only exception being Gaiden and FE1. I don't find those games fun at all because of the NES jank. But every other game, I just enjoy the core gameplay loop a lot. And Engage is no exception. So when I say that I didn't like Engage, I mean that in the context of Fire Emblem, right? I love this series, and some of these games are among my favorites of all time, and Engage just isn't one of them. And that's okay. Not every game has to appeal to me. I do plan, I know I've said this a couple times, I do plan on doing a full bonus episode on my thoughts in Engage, for 30, 45 minutes, just talking about the various things I liked and didn't like about it. And that, I don't have any estimate for when that's going to be out. I don't even know if I'm going to get this episode out on time. I'm currently 3.5 hours away from the end of my from the end of Sunday my time. So who knows? But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy playing Engage. I'm not going to bother with any other news this time around because it's all going to be engaged stuff, like the stuff about the DLC, stuff about the pre-order. I guess there's like some weird stuff going on with the pre-order bonuses. I guess some people aren't getting all their pins. Some people are getting duplicates. I saw one where someone got 2 Corrin pins instead of the Micaiah one, and I was like, oh no, that poor person, because Corrin, of all the characters to get 2 of, 2 Ericas, 2 Leafs, like fine, whatever, but 2 Corrins, come on. That sucks, but it is what it is. Anyway, the other thing, I've beaten a couple games. I don't think, yeah, no, I haven't beaten any other than Engage since the last episode. But except for one, I did beat one, and that was I finally beat Fire Emblem 1, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light for the Switch. I talked about that in the very first episode. It was in the news segment of the first episode of Melee's Turn Wheel. I talked about how I bought Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light on the Switch for $6 or whatever it was, and I was playing it 3 whole years ago almost, and it took me this long to beat it. I was like, I wasn't having a good time. I was plugging away at it, little by little, and eventually I think I was on chapter 20-ish. And the other day, I just decided to sit down and bang out the last few chapters. A lot of the end of that game is like a huge warp skip fest, so it really wasn't that difficult. And I beat it. So I can officially say that I've played 16 out of 17 Fire Emblem games. The only one that I'm still missing at this point is Fire Emblem 3: Mystery of the Emblem. And so at some point I plan to hop on that as well. I just don't know exactly when, but I'll be sure to let you guys know when I do that. I'm hoping that it'll be, I'm sure it'll be a bit more fun. I kind of wanted to get FE1 out of the way first so that I could play, kind of the mediocre, version of that game before getting into it with Fire Emblem 3 as well. I'm not going to talk about any of them because this episode is already going pretty long, but there are a couple of interesting differences between the original game and Shadow Dragon. Like, for instance, I'll talk about like 1 or 2 of them. For instance, Camus in Shadow Dragon FE11 is not the boss. Instead, he is a kind of like a guy who, he's like a mini boss basically. The boss of that map is, I think, Lorenz or some generic guy. But basically, Camus is there. It's kind of to make the map more difficult because he'll actually like attack you instead of just sitting there on the throne. But in FE1, he's there on the throne. He's the final boss of the map. Garnef, first of all, the Geosphere trick from Shadow Dragon does not work on him because all Garnefs take damage from Geosphere in FE1. But also, all of the Garnefs are together. So it really doesn't affect how you play the map at all. You can just kind of like rush the center or like the top, I guess. And, you'll find them there because there's 4 of them and they're all kind of like huddled together in a little group. And the one that is real is obvious because he has a battle quote and the rest of them don't. So, just a couple of minor things like that that's interesting to talk about. Micallus moves in FE1. It's kind of like Camus. The way they handled Camus and Micallus in FE11 are swapped for FE1. And I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. I don't plan on ever playing it again, just like I don't plan on ever playing Gaiden again. I'm certainly not going to play it for this podcast. Obviously, we've already we started with 4, so I wouldn't have to anyway. But regardless, I just I feel accomplished. I got through one more step of the series, and I'm well on my way to truly being the number 1 Fire Emblem gamer. So yeah, cheer me on to be the number 1 Fire Emblem gamer. And I'll be sure to mention you all in my acceptance speech when they eventually do the Fire Emblem Gamer Awards. When I get my trophy, I will definitely give a shout out to you guys. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a nice rest of your day. I did the question this time, right? Yeah, I said favorite Fog of War map. So make sure you let me know what your favorite Fog of War map is in Fire Emblem by tweeting at @IMameLayKirby or emailing turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, so have a nice rest of your day, everybody, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye-bye.